Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final event of our week-long series around the Democratic National Convention. We're so excited to have you all with us. Today, we have an amazing final event that our team's been working super hard on surrounding environmental justice and specifically the Flint water crisis. So thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping things. My name is Jonah Gottlieb, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the National Children's Campaign. Our team has been working hard for the past few months and will continue to be working hard through Election Day to make sure that every single American who is eligible is voting and voting on behalf of the children in their lives. And so if you are a young person, make sure that the adults in your lives are voting on your behalf at voteforourfuture.org/vote. They can register, they can learn how to vote by mail, check their polling place, all sorts of stuff like that. If you want to check out our future events from now through Election Day, you can go to voteforourfuture.org/events. And if you want to check out some cool merch, like this shirt that I'm wearing right now, just arrived yesterday, you can go to voteforourfuture.org/merch. You can get t-shirts, hoodies, face masks, all sorts of cool designs. So please go check that out if you want to support the campaign. And lastly, if you want to join our team and help plan awesome events like this, if you have any ideas for ways that you can help us change the country and grow this movement, you can email us at info@nationalchildrenscampaign.org, or you can send us a direct message on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can check out our YouTube, our Twitch, our LinkedIn, all sorts of cool stuff. So that's all the housekeeping stuff. And so without further ado, I just want to interview our fantastic moderators for today's event, Patrick and Sebastian, two of our amazing youth activists for the National Children's Campaign. Welcome, Patrick and Sebastian.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so my name's Sebastian Duque, and we have Patrick Kim here with me. Pretty much, today we're going to be talking about environmental justice and how it relates to the Flint water crisis. We're going to start by talking about what led up to Flint. Then we're going to get into how the Flint water crisis happened and what it was like for the citizens of Flint. And then we're going to go into the aftermath implications, as well as how youth organizing ties into all of it. So first of all, let me welcome our amazing panelists. We have Kayla Shannon with us today, a writer and poet who grew up in Flint. Let me tell you, if y'all have not read or listened to Kryptonite, you are missing out, all right? We also have Naira Sharif with us. They are a grassroots organizer and co-founder of the Flint Democracy Defense League, and currently they are the director of Flint Rising. They've been featured in Al Jazeera, Democracy Now!, and so many more, you name it. We also have Mustafa Santiago Ali with us today, a pioneer in environmental justice. He's been a policymaker, strategist, educator, activist, spent the majority of his career protecting and rejuvenating the nation's most vulnerable and at-risk communities, featured in platforms like CNN, Vice, and National Geographic. And just thank you so much for being with us today, y'all.
Awesome. So we just want to start off our conversation not talking about the water crisis in particular, but just talking about Flint in general, because we know that the water crisis had national presence and even international presence, but we know that Flint is not just defined by the water crisis, but also by the community. So we just want to start off with a question for Naira. We know that you have a record of about 10 years of organizing experience. So we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about organizing in Flint in general, and specifically before the water crisis.
Sure. I mean, I feel like after moving back to Flint, after I graduated from college, like I wanted to like live here for the rest of my life, because it was something that, like this deep history around justice. I mean, in the 1930s, like the UAW, fought against General Motors, which is at the time the largest company in the world in one, and they were able to like have the right to organize, and that like really, built a lot of wealth for a lot of folks. And my parents came here during the Great Migration to work in the shop, and they were able to like raise a family and become homeowners, and whatever people felt the American dream was, like existed for many in Flint. But through structural divestment and racial capitalism, a lot of that stuff kind of went away. And like even though like this deep history around organizing and justice, and in 1968, Flint was the first community in the country to pass open housing by popular vote, and it only won by about 53 votes. Like we have like this deep history of justice, and I felt like through my own organizing experience and working, like with marginalized populations, young people, youth in foster care, people in public housing, like I felt like, like we needed to make sure that people's voices are centered. We don't need spokespeople to speak, our narratives and our stories for us. Like we can speak very eloquently all by ourselves, and we just need to have situations for people to share their own stories and step already exists within them.
Yeah, that's amazing. I definitely think that Flint is often overshadowed by the water crisis and the national attention, but there's definitely a lot of nuances within the community. To Mustafa, Nayura mentioned some of the issues surrounding Flint and the issues surrounding justice, and specifically around like racial capitalism. So I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about the intersections between environmental justice, economic justice, and racial justice, especially because Flint is a community with a lot of people of color, and a lot of these communities are burdened by these injustices. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on these intersections and how these intersections are reflected in policy decisions.
Yeah, I can do that if you want to have some real talk. Nira, definitely hit it on the head. I mean, Flint is a representation of many Black and brown and sometimes lower wealth white communities across our country. And there has been intentionality in those communities that our country, whether on the federal level or the state level, are willing to invest in. And when we see these disinvestments that was raised before, is when we see the creation or expansion of sacrifice zones. These sacrifice zones are where we place everything that nobody else wants. And they also are the locations where folks never get any of the good stuff. The good stuff like places like Ann Arbor or Farmington Hills or a number of other locations that I can name throughout the state of Michigan. And the intentionality in our policy is where systemic racism can be seen to have some of the most devastating impacts. If you look at the history of our country, in our housing policy, in our transportation policy, in our banking policy, in our public health policy, and our medical policy, you will see whom are the beneficiaries of good services and truly well thought out policies that are then implemented, and who are the communities who are not on the receiving end of the positive but get all of the negative. If you look at the things that have gone on over the years with restrictive covenants and redlining, then you see how people are pushed into certain areas and then the disinvestment that happens. If you look at how our transportation routes have been created, there have been some real intentional actions in moving wealth into certain communities and breaking up other communities and dumping off pollution in those communities. And of course, with our medical system, we know the biases that have existed in those as well. And sometimes folks will say, well, how did this happen? It must be choices that people are making. If you look at Flint or a number of other Black and brown cities and towns across our country, at one time they were thriving. People had the things that they needed to a degree, and they were being able to frame out their direction. And the environmental justice movement, as Nira had raised earlier, communities speak for themselves, but communities are also supposed to be empowered to make the choices that are necessary. And when you have policies that are stopping that from happening, either blocking people from being able to play a critical role in the framing out of that legislation or in the resources that come from that, then you are creating a situation that puts people in very dire straits. And it's not dire in the theory context. It is dire literally in communities of color who are literally, their lives are being shortened or sometimes even been taken by these actions that have happened and by this disinvestment that still continues to today. The current administration just played some games recently around with the banking industry. They've been playing games around housing and saying and trying to cause some fear mongering, with people who are in the suburbs, in relationship to how dollars are going to flow and where people can move. So all of this is a part of the unpacking of how the structural racism has been so detrimental, both in Flint and in other locations across our country.
Right. I think some of those injustices have been reflected within the pandemic as well. And it's just devastating to see that. To Kayla, we were wondering if you could kind of elaborate more on Flint before the crisis and the water crisis as a whole, not just related to the injustices that we've been talking about, but just as a community as a whole. If you could describe your experience within Flint, just to get a better picture of the entire community of Flint instead of it just as the place where the water crisis happened.
Absolutely. So for me, Flint has always been a growing place and a prospering place of art. And so a lot of my experience with the city of Flint, is surrounding art and the prosperity of my art. And so I'm a spoken word poet, and I began writing because of the city of Flint, because of a nonprofit organization called Raise It Up, Youth Arts and Awareness, that was bringing youth from the city of Flint in and giving them a space where they were not only able to, but empowered to, encouraged to speak about anything and everything that was on their mind, anything that was affecting them. And so I came into that space as a young 13-year-old scared girl who didn't know much about the world, or let alone about myself. And it was because of the city of Flint and because of people in the city of Flint who encouraged me and were constantly patting me on my back. I was able to perform around not only the city of Flint and to meet amazing people who I look up to, such as Angela Davis, but I was also able to venture outside of the city of Flint and to see more of the world. And many of the connections that I have today are because of the connections that I've made within the city of Flint. And so for me, the city of Flint, outside of what you see of the water crisis, though that is absolutely, of course, extremely important for us to highlight, the city of Flint is a place that has always been strong because of the art that rests at the foundation of everything. Because for me and for many others within the city, art is power, and our power is our art. And so the way that we're able to represent ourselves as a city through whether it be spoken work or written work or painted work, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you go anywhere within the city of Flint, you will see all of these representations, whether it be murals on walls, or whether you see people singing in downtown or anything like that. The city of Flint has always been a place where where you can come for culture and for an insight into what pain looks like when it's wrapped with a bow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kayla. I think that's amazing that art is such an integral part of the Flint community, and I think it's something that's often overlooked. So thanks so much for bringing light on that.
Yeah, so with that, we kind of want to shift on to the next part of our panel, which is more talking about the crisis itself. And so I want to start off that by asking Naira, what was the tipping point that really changed everything? You know, if you could pinpoint that for us, and particularly in reference to the Emergency Manager Act and you know, their decision that really brought the city of Flint to the crisis that became national headlines.
Yeah, because you can't really talk about the Flint water crisis unless you talk about the theft of democracy in Flint under Michigan's emergency manager law. And that was implemented in Flint. Really, like the announcement was like on our election day. We were electing a mayor, and the state made the decision that they were going to suppress the vote and announced it on election day that Flint was receiving an emergency manager. And that was kind of like a gut punch, especially for me, because I was working with other folks across the city and around the state to put a referendum on the ballot, because we saw what was happening in the three communities, the three majority Black communities that were grandfathered in an emergency manager. So Detroit Public Schools, the city of Pontiac, and the city of Benton Harbor. And we had formed this collective to really put this on the ballot. And immediately after the emergency manager came in, so the emergency manager, you know, has like 4 powers. They can initiate bankruptcy proceedings. And that's actually what happened in Detroit with the largest municipal bankruptcy like in the country's history. They can hire and fire employees. They can sell off public assets without a vote of the people, and they can renegotiate and create new contracts without a vote of a union or a vendor. And when an emergency manager comes into your community, into your school district or your municipality, they automatically zero out the salaries of those elected officials. And the emergency manager makes the decision what kind of salary that person, those elected officials will get, if any, and what sort of duties they have moving forward. And in my opinion, like this is a new form of voter suppression. So instead of the representative democracy that we know and make problems with, this is instead of that where you elect someone, instead of that framework where you elect someone, and the person that you elect is accountable to the people who are who elect them, they become employees of the emergency manager. So it breaks up that framework, and it's a new form of voter suppression, because instead of like what we're experiencing, the type of voter suppression now, you know, like with at the ballot, but you are electing someone that has no power and whose power could be taken away at any time, you know, for the interests of the state. And really, like this really became this was really like a way that was more amenable to Wall Street, because after the Great Recession, you know, Michigan's funds were in the toilet, and how like our state fund cities is through revenue sharing, because we only have like a flat tax. And what the state like disperses money to communities, and the state use that money that they would have dispersed to communities to balance their own budget, and then punish communities that did not have, you know, the funding or the funding to survive. And like when a state has multiple municipalities going to bankruptcy, their bond rating will go down, and so their lending power is stymied. And so this was a way to maintain the state's own lending power, which is basically Wall Street. and corporate banks. So in Flint, like I was actually fighting that for many years and getting it on the ballot, witnessing the court case because it was a court challenge to even get it on the ballot. The Michigan State Supreme Court had to order it to get on the ballot. We got it on the ballot. It was voted down in November 2012, and 30 days later, the state legislature during lame duck passed a virtually identical version of the bill and then put a $30,000 appropriation on it so we couldn't go through the referendum process again. And at that point, it just felt like we're going to need the courts to make this particular decision. And all of that happened before the emergency manager made the switch to bring us to Flint water, because that was basically a stopgap. Because the emergency manager does not have to make any decisions in the interest of public health or in the interest of public good. They're only looking at what can they sell off, what could they privatize to balance the books, and looking at like how the emergency manager impacted other communities. It was basically going to, like, public assets were going to the lowest bidder, to private hands, and the private hands, had connections to the emergency manager or to the governor. So it was basically like a fire sale that was going on. And the reason why we even moved to the Flint River, it was basically a stopgap. The emergency manager felt that our clean source of water cost too much, and he wanted to get involved in some other scheme that was being financed to build a redundant water system. And the emergency manager said, well, this looks better. We're just gonna go with that. And in the meantime, we're just gonna drink Flint River water. And the rest of the county was able to remain connected to the clean source of water. And so, like, the involvement really happened in waves. So you had the folks who were, already on board with restoring democracy and got to the Flint water fight because it was an action of the emergency manager, and they were already fighting. And then you had a wave of folks who got involved because they were fighting the high water rates, because we had, over 20,000 people who had lost their homes through the tax foreclosure process, and that was through outstanding water bills. And so you had like people who were jumping in around water affordability. And then later on, you had folks who jumped in because of some of the water quality issues. So all of that didn't happen at the same time. And even though when we felt that we, were able to get some validators, like there was still no response from the state, because we felt like, well, maybe if there is a test that is proving that, like there is lead in the water, then, maybe people will like listen to us. And the response was like, well, go kick rocks. And then it was like, well, like maybe if we have another validator, we have a physician that says that, like the blood lead levels are elevated. And the response was still like, go kick rocks. We'll give you these filters, like shut up and be happy. And like, once we get like this new pipeline built, like you all be be able to join the promised land. And so it really took like a lot of, sustain and continue advocacy to even get that. And I would say the tipping point for us was what we had elected a new mayor, because at that time in 2015, there was a mayoral race, and the Flint water crisis became the only issue in that race. And the mayor-elect, at the time, the mayor-elect, Dr. Karen Williams Weaver, her campaign promise was, if I'm elected, I'm going to declare a state of emergency based on the lead contamination in this water. And she was elected, and within 30 days, she, announced like the state of emergency based on lead contamination. And then that finally busted the media blackout, because like she made that announcement at 2 p.m., at 4 p.m., like it was on the ticker on CNN, and by 9 p.m., she was on Rachel Maddow. And that like really kind of like busted it, wide open.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Yeah, it's crazy really how much the Department of Environmental Quality really tried to pretty much gaslight the people of Flint into believing that they were making this up, when they had all sorts of proof backing the fact that there was indeed lead in the water. So Kayla, I just wanted to ask you, if you feel comfortable sharing, what were some of the changes that you all saw when you changed over from the Detroit water system to the Flint water system?
Absolutely. Actually, I was actually going to make this correction. I did not live in the city of Flint when the switch over was made from the Detroit water crisis. From the Detroit water system to the Flint water system. And so if I'd like to default to the other panelists, if you guys could answer that question.
Well, I would say, very, very soon after, like people had issues with the water, and they went down to the city council meeting, and we had to explain from the audience that the city council, even though, like we basically have this veneer of democracy, like they're like, like hitting the gavel and then having public comment, but they're unable to make any decisions. But people were bringing their water, down for months, and the water was looking like morning after urine and chicken broth, and smelling like an open sewer. I mean, like my water was smelling like open sewer. I was getting rashes by bathing, even though I was buying bottled water for the most part. But like after it was like smelling odorous, I purchased bottled water, but I was still bathing in the water with no filter. And so I was getting rashes, and, my hair was thinning, and, my skin was like, just itching and burning and just feeling really inflamed. But people were bringing, like all of that stuff down to public meetings, even like the hair that had fallen off of their head. And, like some of the response was like, well, that's not your water. And it's like, well, this is my water. And they're like, no, that's not your water. You must have put some dye in your water. And it's just like, it was like straight up gaslighting. And it wasn't just like the DEQ that was doing that. It was people from the governor's office. Like it was the governor's spokesperson, his chief of staff. And they were going all over the place and going on to public radio and the news. And it just, like, for many times, it just was kind of like this tennis match. Or maybe like kind of a three-way kind of kickball thing between like the community and then like the state officials and then the media, because it was just like, like we would raise up this issue, like around like the cost of water. And then, like our local newspaper, the Flint Journal, would like be like, well, actually, they are paying the highest rates in the county. Like we didn't realize at the time we were paying one of the highest rates in the country. And then like there will be no response to the state, or it will be it was just kind of like that. It just felt like in many ways like kind of like this like just lobs back and forth, and like nobody taking responsibility for what's going on with people's health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really was just the governor's office that they were pretty much saying that nothing was going on. And it's really just really sad to see what that government put the people of Flint through. And so with that, we kind of want to move on to the next part of our panel. Patrick, if you want to take the lead.
Yeah, so we wanted kind of to focus on the implications of the crisis and kind of reflect on what that actually meant and kind of the aftermath of the crisis itself. So Nira, you mentioned a lot of these injustices, and you mentioned how even though your hair was thinning and people were showing this like colored water, the government just wasn't listening. And so to Mustafa, we wanted to kind of ask about what that issue had to do with racial justice. And specifically, we know that the Flint water crisis, it was like relatively clean by federal standards, but it had a lot of PFAS, which are basically these toxic forever chemicals. And they're found especially in communities of color. And so we just wanted to ask kind of how that relates to racial justice and how our elected officials should deal with that problem in the future in order to be anti-racist and to fix that systemic problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nira shared with us one of the challenges that Black and Brown and Indigenous communities and sometimes lower wealth white communities have also dealt with across our country, where folks know that there's something wrong. They know that there are impacts that are happening, especially when you can look at a glass of water or a bottle of water and you know what color it's supposed to be. You know that it's supposed to be pretty much odorless. There are some chemicals, of course, that you can't see and can't smell. But Black and Brown communities have had to, go the extra mile continually to prove, that the impacts that are happening inside of their communities are real. And that should never be the paradigm that any government is operating from. That is not the community's responsibility. The government is utilizing people's tax dollars, and those tax dollars are supposed to be used to, one, provide a public good, and two, to also make sure that folks are being protected. And unfortunately, that did not happen, and has not happened in many cases. And there is a reason for that. And the reason for that is that folks place value on certain lives. It's that plain and simple. Folks will sit here and give you all these other excuses and reasons for why some of these things happen. If you truly valued these folks' lives, then as soon as there was any alarm that or red flag that was raised, people should have automatically been on it, and they should have been making sure that people had the information that they needed, and two, were being protected. And when that doesn't happen, then you find the situations that so many brothers and sisters, in Flint and in some other locations have had to deal with. And I like to frame it out for folks in a way that they might be able to actually wrap their minds around, for those who understand recent history. If you look at the apartheid system in South Africa that people work so hard to dismantle, then you'll get a better understanding of when they bring these officials in to oversee Black and Brown areas and make decisions that Nira shared with everybody. It is very reminiscent of extraction of power from people, and a small group of folks who are disconnected, who don't live in these communities, often nowhere even near close to these communities, who are making decisions about what goes on. The other thing that has to change is when you look at how states are given responsibility for the protection of our air and our water from the federal government. So there's something called delegation, the delegation of the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act and so forth and so on. There is this assumption that the states are going to do the right thing. And of course, then that is going to be done by the county or local areas as well. And when you have these situations that happen where you have leadership in a state that has no focus on doing the right thing, because they are trying to create this narrative that everything is okay, or that what people are sharing is not true, we have to make sure that there are these stopgap measures that are in place. And there are some, but we've got to strengthen those to make sure that people are actually being truly protected in that space. So there's responsibility, both for the state of Michigan, but there's also responsibility from the federal folks as well, with some of the things that went on. And if we don't make sure that we're fixing that, it will happen again. I think it's more difficult for it to happen again because folks are pushing back. Folks are getting engaged and trying to build the right structures and accountability. But we often know that when it comes to our most vulnerable communities, it is always an uphill battle to get the basic minimums. So if you look at water quality standards across our country, people only have to get up to the bare minimum for it to be acceptable. But the problem with our communities is that just having the basic minimums is not enough, because in many of our communities, because of the toxic exposures and the toxic loading that happens in our bodies, then lots of these pre-existing medical conditions are in play. So when you just have the bare minimum that may be protective of somebody who's healthy and who has lived in pristine areas, that's just not the reality for our communities. And, we have to continue to ratchet up, especially in areas where we know folks have already been dealing with challenges, that their water quality has to be at an even higher standard. And there are those who push back against that, because then they get into this whole cost benefit analysis, and all these other, externalities that people bring into the overall analysis. And I just give people real talk about what we really need to do if we're serious about protecting Black and brown lives and Indigenous lives, and many of the other folks who are in our vulnerable communities. So I'm sure we'll unpack this further, but I thought that was important to share.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's definitely surprising, and it's just like terrible kind of just to hear about those injustices happening. To Kayla, we wanted to kind of ask specifically about the youth perspective and what you think the water crisis's impact on children was, in particular. And also, because you've been involved in art and activism through art, we were wondering what role children kind of played in that movement, and kind of the impact children can have in the action that Mustafa is talking about. So the policy change and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So as far as the impact on the children of Flint because of this water crisis, I think the immediate thing, obviously, is that we have young people who are in their most important developmental stages who are now being set back by a lead crisis. And so there's an entire age range of young people who are between the ages of obviously newborn up to about 8 or 9, who are in their most fundamental, important developmental periods, who are now struggling. And when you look at their tests, they're now testing lower and testing below what they're supposed to test in reading and math and science and ELA tests and the M-STEP test that Michigan requires our young people to take. We see them again and again testing lower, and already even before the water crisis, these people, our young people, were testing below what the state required or expected of them, because they're in an inner city neighborhood, because they are already struggling with the systematic oppression that targets the Flint community on a regular basis, because they're already struggling with the lasting impacts of white flight, because they're still struggling with the lasting impacts of all of these overlapping issues that were affecting the city of Flint even prior to the water crisis. And so we have young people who are dealing now not only with the social issues that come with being in a Black or brown neighborhood in America, now also dealing with the physical burden of a crisis. And so I think that's obviously the immediate effect is just that we're developing. You're in the process of developing, and you're also in the process of learning the world. And so it becomes very difficult when you're a young person coming of age in America to see your community targeted because of your economic standing, because of the demographics of your city. And so it becomes very hard to be confident in yourself and your power as you function within society when you are being told by the actions of your government that you don't matter, that your life isn't of value to us, that you are not important to us, that you are not our priority. And so we as a community are then pushing young people, I, of course, being one of them, we're being pushed to vote, to go out and register to vote, to go out and, become functioning members of society, become functioning to be civically active and civically engaged, while at the same time recognizing that in many ways we are suppressed in the same ways that we are told to be active. And so it's like, you want young people to go out and vote, and we're being told to go out and register to vote, but then it's like, it doesn't matter. We're under an emergency manager. None of our votes actually are going to have an impact. And so that was another impact, because now you're questioning everything that's considered fundamental to America, to the way that America functions. And so that was another impact. As far as arts, as I said, I functioned in that space within the city of Flint for a long time. And so it was amazing to me to see how resilient, though, that the young people were and continue to be. You see these young people who are facing things that are unimaginable, even to me, and that are unimaginable to adults. You see 18-year-olds who are taking care of their entire family, who are their family's sole breadwinner, who are taking care of their grandma who was impacted by the water crisis and is still struggling with the health impacts of that. But you see them smile, and you see them excited, and you see them creating art pieces and talking about life, and talking about hope, and talking about love, and continuing to love hard, and continuing to fall hard every single day, and to get up excited every single day to see what the day offers them. And so I would say that's the beautiful part of art, and the art that comes from the city of Flint, is that yes, absolutely, there are struggles with being a citizen of Flint. But also the community itself and the young people, I would say especially, are so resilient and have combat these issues and faced these issues head on. And although they should not have to be this strong, there is no reason that a 10-year-old should have to know what it feels like to go through a water crisis, should have to know what it feels like to nurse their mother through rashes from lead. This is something that young people should not have to worry about. It should be their last concern. But the fact that these young people went through it and are still pushing, are still kicking, and didn't skip a beat in many ways. And so as far as art goes, to see the art that has come through this and come because of this situation from our young people is amazing. As far as how we function in these spaces of activism, I think it's very important for us to recognize the part that young people have played in revolution throughout history. We have so many cases over and over again where young people stand up and have a voice, and when they are given the space and the platform, create change. And so I think young people in this space, as far as change goes, and as far as public policy, I mean, many of the people who were 10, 11, 12, when in the midst of the water crisis and when it first began, are now coming to voting age. And so we now have the opportunity to say, I remember what you did. I remember what happened, and I'm going to participate as a member of this democracy, and show you by way of my vote, and not only by way of voting, with that being a very important way, but by way of voting, but also we're also coming to the age where we can start running for some of these offices in our community. And so it's even inspiring to me to see young people now running for office and ready to be the voice that they wished they had when they were younger, for the people that are under them and coming up. And so I think through not only art and there are so many avenues that young people in the city of Flint are taking in order to have their voices heard. And as far as the young people who unfortunately aren't able to vote, you see, for example, Little Miss Flint is still not to voting age, and she has been active for years, and she has been actively fighting to have young people heard. And so I think young people play a monumental role in the process of altering public policy and in the process of changing the future, but also changing now. I think it's very important for us to shift this mindset that young people are the generation of tomorrow, or young people are going to impact the world tomorrow. But for us to recognize the fact that we're changing things today, and that tomorrow isn't so far away, you know? And so, yeah, it's just amazing to see the change that's been brought about by young people throughout the state of Michigan, but specifically in Flint, in light of the water crisis and after all of that happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. I found it pretty powerful when you said about how like it's important to see what the government actually does, because sometimes they say that they're advocating for children and spew all this rhetoric, but they're not actually showing it through action. And I just thought that that was a really important part of what you kind of said about children and youth, and the youth and young people's role in the water crisis and environmental justice in general. From this point, we kind of want to shift the conversation again to a little bit of activism, and what we can do as young people and just in general. So Seb.
Yeah, so we kind of want to shift towards, we've seen just how big of an impact environmental injustices have on children. Flint being a great example is really some of the people that are going to suffer the worst consequences are children as they grow up. And so we kind of want to touch upon how in 2017, the Trump administration called for the dismantling of the Office of Environmental Justice, which Mustafa, you helped found. And, Flint is an example, but it's sadly not the first. And hopefully it's the last, but that seems, improbable considering the many ways that the world is headed. So we were just wondering if you could kind of tell us about how you and your colleagues retaliated and how this really demonstrates America's need for a president that fights for children as well as just for communities, disenfranchised communities as a whole.
In the environmental justice movement, people have been fighting, organizing, mobilizing for decades upon decades upon decades. I mean, if we talk about the true history of our country, since the hundreds and hundreds of years ago, indigenous brothers and sisters were pushing back. When African slaves were brought to this country against their will, they began pushing back because of all these injustices that happened. And we can go throughout the history of time. When it came to me and the folks who surrounded me, I knew I had a responsibility. I was raised and mentored by many in the civil rights movement and the environmental justice movement. And I come from a community that had been impacted. So I knew that I had a response, and I tried to innovate the opportunities that a new administration would have to do the right thing. My mother used to have this saying, what she would say, when you know better, do better. So I had hoped that maybe, these folks would do better, but I knew that I couldn't be a part of the administration because I knew that they were going to, if what they said they were going to do came to fruition, I knew that folks that I cared about, the communities I had worked in, were going to get sick and were going to die. So I wrote that resignation letter that they tell me over 1 million people read to bring attention to environmental justice. And what are the possibilities, but sometimes people pay too much attention to what folks inside the federal family do and have done. environmental justice comes from the people. It comes from the frontline communities, and they were the ones, raising the alarms, working and pushing reporters to tell the true stories and put a spotlight on what was going on, forcing foundations to begin to shift and to move their portfolios in a different direction to make sure the frontline communities have the capacity that they need to fully be able to engage in the fight. So it is everybody coming together, who have helped to make change happen. And without everybody doing that, we've already seen the egregious things that have happened under this current administration, and why, folks have been sharing how important our vote is, long as it is connected and focused to real power and change and legislation that actually is meant to help our communities and not harm our communities. So that is our focus. So when you ask me the question, what have folks been doing to push back? It's literally all kinds of folks coming together to say that, the 21st century has to look different than the 20th century was, or even the beginning of the 2000s. And you see that each and every day now, with so many folks coming together, willing to put their bodies on the line against injustice, the injustice that is coming from police, injustice that is coming from this administration, injustices wherever they might be coming from county governments and state governments. So it is all those folks coming together along with our ancestors holding us up and pushing us forward that is making real change happen. So that's the best way that I can respond to, what's been going on over the last few years. There is an awakening that is happening in our country. There is a cultural shift that is happening, and that scares people. And that's why you see some of the actions that you've currently seen, at the Michigan State House, where you have armed folks who will literally go and hold the governor, hostage and feeling that they have the right to do that. It is because of this cultural shift that has people so scared that they are now going to be held accountable for their behaviors in the moment and moving forward. That if you try and pull some mess like happened in Flint, you're going to be held accountable. And hopefully you will be held accountable both financially and criminally. And there is this change that is happening that I think all of us, whether we've been working on this for a year or been working on it for 50 years, have been planting the seeds, watering those seeds, and all of that energy now coming together. So, whether it's my small thing that I've done or the totality of all these incredible folks, like the folks who are here on the screens today, and literally tens of thousands of others, it's all of us coming together that are making this change happen.
Yeah, of course. Really, it's just inspiring really to hear all three of your stories. And thank you so much for everything that you've done for your communities and really for the entire country, because Flint is a microcosm of, what could really happen to any of our disenfranchised communities. So really, thank you for all the work that you have all put into this community and environmental justice, really. So I did want to slightly touch upon the recent settlement. I am sure you have all been receiving tons of questions and discussion about it, and I am so sorry to have to bring it up, but just something brief, what does this settlement look like to you? And, really, what does it mean? Is it a start? Is it a solution? Really, what does it mean to you? Does it mean that the Michigan government is finally acknowledging all the wrong that they did, or are they simply trying to save face? Really, anyone who wants to chime in first with this question, because
Well, since I'm not originally or lived in Flint, maybe I'll say something, then I'll let the folks who are on the front lines actually take you a bit deeper. For me, and working on these issues for so many years, and thinking about the sacrifices that folks inside of communities have made. And I saw a figure, and I'll let those who are experts, actually, correct me or go deeper. When you're talking about maybe somebody might, as an individual, in the totality of these settlements, might get, a few $1,000s. Somebody called me up the other day, or not the other day, it was actually last night, and said, Mustafa, I paid more in bottled water than what I might end up getting as a result of this. So I know we want to praise progress when we see sometimes these smaller acts actually being done. Sometimes people expect us to lower our expectations so much that they can meet those expectations instead of reaching the real expectations about how are you really going to revitalize Flint, and why has it taken you so long to actually be able to do that. And when I say revitalize, I'm not talking about, we put a park in here, or, the basics that people have been asking for, being able to have safe and affordable water. Those should be automatic. People should not even have to fight for that to happen, but unfortunately we do. How are you really going to focus resources into making real change and building power inside of the communities who are there? That's the type of change that I'm interested in as somebody who advocates across the country. But again, communities speak for themselves. But I know a couple of folks have reached out and they were just like, you know what? After all these years, this is all that we got so far. People who poisoned us still aren't sitting in prison, where a brother can go in and, because he's trying to feed his family, take something off of a store shelf and can spend 15 or 20 years in prison. Then there's something wrong with the system and the set of expectations that they expect us to be okay with. And again, that's coming from somebody who lived in Appalachia and Detroit, and not somebody who has lived in Flint. So I'm going to turn it over to the sisters, who I'm sure have a much more expansive view of what needs to go on.
Well, I did some number crunching because I always want to see what I'm working with. By using like the 2019 American Community Survey data, if that settlement was divided equally, it was like $6,200 and some change. But that's not how it is, because that is 600 million before legal fees and the administrator, the fund, and all that other stuff. So just like if you have this expectation that it's the full 600 million, I was exposed to the water as an adult, and that's like $1,200 for me, because it's only 15% of it for adults. And I'm like, the state values my life for like $1,200. That's like less than one of my paychecks. And just thinking about, like now I have seizures. I have non-epileptic seizures that I now deal with because of whatever, by inhaling the steam from this water, being around this water. I don't feel comfortable driving. Like, I haven't gone for a run in years because I'm afraid that I'm going to fall out somewhere. I have like severe upper respiratory issues, and I had asthma every year. And it's like an insult, just saying like, well, my life is worth this much, $1,200. And this is how I'm valued by the state. And even though, the majority of it is going to be for children, like that's not going to actually go directly to kids. It's going to be for services that will trickle down and I guess like through the atmosphere and positively impact kids. The things that we were advocating for, like we didn't get. We wanted healthcare for life for like all residents. So you wouldn't have to worry about, as you age, you don't have to worry about going to bankruptcy or losing your home because of medical bills. Like we wanted college funds for kids so they didn't have to worry about going into debt to pay for college. We wanted all of our pipes to be replaced, all the internal plumbing to be replaced. And none of that is in existence to the settlement. Now, I guess like on its face, it's kind of hopeful because maybe, you know, you have other communities that will sue their governments to get some money, and maybe that will finally spark, you know, like widespread investment in our infrastructure that needed to be invested, you know, 5 days past yesterday. But it's somewhat disgusting, and especially like now that the settlement's coming out now in the middle of a pandemic, because you know, conspiracy theory Naira is like, are you trying to coerce people to take this money because they're struggling? You trying to coerce them to take pennies because they're struggling and people are in fear of getting evicted and folks still haven't received their unemployment. And so you're looking at this, that this is going to help you now and it's going to be terrible. I mean, that stuff always happens. So, I mean, it's, you know, like I just feel like it's kind of terrible, and I feel like it's like a bait and switch for the community. And this expectation, which is just very disgusting and just couched and crowded in white supremacy, is like, you know, like we take your trash and we expect it to be grateful for it. And there's like, I don't like trash. Like I like I like the trash.
Yeah, so I think they spoke to this quite eloquently. It's cute. I mean, that's nice. You cut a little check. I think a capitalistic society that places numbers on humans will always try to cut a check to solve systematic problems. And it's not enough. It's less than not enough. As Nair said, it's literally throwing pennies at an open wound and hoping that it'll seal it. And I think that's what I'm not surprised. Let me say that. I think our government, America, has always tried to throw money at its problems. We are in debt for that reason, in part. There are fundamental changes to the system. We are not, yes, money is helpful. First of all, this is barely anything, as has been stated, but money isn't necessarily what we're looking for in and of itself. We want policy. We want evidence of change that is going to last beyond a check. This money is going to come and go. This money is going to be spent, and then the government, proud of themselves, is going to pat themselves on the back and move on to the next issue as if they did not poison an entire city of people, as if they did not murder, as if they did not sign the death certificate of thousands of people. We are not going to continue to pretend as if money is going to solve our problems. Money, in many ways, is the root of this problem. I find it ironic that in order to fix a problem that began because we were trying to cut checks, because we were trying to decrease the budget, is now being solved. Where was this money when we were looking to switch over? Where was this money when we needed it? We have money now. I find that interesting. I find that interesting that now somewhere in the budget, we've managed to pinch out $60 million that could have prevented this crisis all those years ago. I'm confused. And so, as has been already stated, it's not enough. I won't speak to the hearts of these people because I don't know them personally, but I think this speaks to their character. I find it interesting that they could even fix their minds to believe that this would in some way solve their problem. I do think that it is not coincidental that this happened in the midst of a pandemic where people are already disproportionately affected. but even to say, knowing that these people who have been impacted by a water crisis and are therefore that much more susceptible to this disease, to say that this much money would be enough is an insult. And so we can call it a start, but considering the fact that we were already behind the start line to begin with, I don't know how much of a start this is.
Yeah, I think it was really powerful how y'all said, like, you know, it's almost like they expect you all to lower your expectations. It's like, you know, like, yeah, really the pennies to an open wound was really powerful. And yeah, I just, it really goes to show how in many cases they do try to kind of just like cover up the problem with money rather than going back to actually addressing what caused the problem in the first place. You know, there's so much that we've seen with just this panel. You know, they took away the democracy, and then on top of that, that taking away of the democracy led to just so many problems, and now they're trying to throw money on top of it when money was like what began the problem. I think that was just you're like, that's on point. So we do want to wrap up the panel now. I know we've gone a little over, and we just want to thank you guys so much for being here. We want to wrap up with kind of like a last question that you can all answer, which is like, if there's anything else you'd like to say, first of all, and why do you think we need a president for kids? Short and simple, just like a 30-second answer as to why you think we need a president for kids, and if there's anything else you'd like to say to our audience.
Well, the way that how we view our children is reflected in the policies and the investments that we're willing to make. And it also says something about who we are as a country. It puts a mirror up. And it's the same thing with communities of color as well. So it truly shows you who a country is by how they treat children and communities of color.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar. Like your budgets are a value statement, and you know, in a capitalist society, you value what you put money towards. But I would like to live in a society that's centered around children, because like when children are centered, you know, our society prospers.
I would agree with that. I think we need a government who is focused on our younger generation, because that is where innovation comes from. It is these minds that are unburdened by adulthood and responsibility and pessimism, that this is where we find innovation. This is where hope goes to fester up into imaginary things. And I think that's what we need. We need more of that in society. We need more space for those things that adult minds find unimaginable.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for your insight. Thanks for showing up today. I hope you guys enjoyed having our conversation about a lot of different types of injustices, not just environmental, but also racial, economic, even democratic. And I hope that you guys enjoyed having a conversation, not just about the settlement, because I know that's big news right now, but definitely just talking about everything that we discussed today. To the audience, I just want to re-emphasize what Jonah introduced in the beginning of our panel. This week, we kind of wanted to emphasize children's issues, especially with the Democratic Convention going on. So especially if you're eligible to vote, or you know someone that is eligible, make sure that they are registered to vote at voteforourfuture.org/vote. For future events until Election Day, go to voteforourfuture.org/events. And for merchandise like Jonah's t-shirt, go to /merch. If you'd like to get involved with the National Children's Campaign, definitely email info@nationalchildrenscampaign.org, and check out us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms. And definitely keep in contact with us because we would love for you to get involved. So again, thank you so much for our insightful discussion. I know I really enjoyed it and found it really powerful to hear all your perspectives on environmental justice and the Flint water crisis in particular. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.